welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time. I'm your host, Marine Perot, and today I invite you to join me as we get a peek behind the scenes of some of the best shows on television. On each episode of this podcast, I chat with someone who worked or works on the shows that we discuss. Writers, directors, designers, actors, you name it. They are here to talk about what makes great TV and to tell us about what goes on beyond our screens. Now, this new episode of Once Upon a TV Time is about a show that recently concluded its second season, was watched by millions of people on HBO and Max, and had us gasping at our TVs all summer. Ladies and gents, let's talk House of the Dragon.
What is this brief mortal life, if not the pursuit of legacy?
I, Rickon Stark.
I, Corlys Velaryon. I, Ormond Baratheon.
Promise to be faithful to King Viserys and to his named heir,
Princess Rhaenyra.
Rhaenyra Targaryen.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
We play an ugly game. You have the determination to win it.
History does not remember blood. It remembers names.
What? 2 episodes in a row in Westeros? Yes, why not? Last episode, I interviewed Jonathan Cohen, who was a stunt performer on Game of Thrones and worked on many iconic episodes, including Battle of the Bastards, which we discussed. And today, I'm going back to the world created by George R.R. Martin to talk to someone who has been involved in both Game of Thrones and its spin-off, House of the Dragon. Now, in case you've been living under a rock and stumbled upon this podcast by accident, House of the Dragon is an HBO series that takes place roughly 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones. It was developed by Ryan Condal and George R.R. Martin, and currently has 2 seasons out, with several more to go. A prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire, it portrays the events that led to the fall of House Targaryen. And here today to talk about all things Westeros is Kieran Belshaw, who works as a concept artist on House of the Dragon under the production designer Jim Clay. Kieran played a key role in shaping up the way many of the iconic places we see on the show look like, as he designed them since the first season in collaboration with Miguel Sapochnik and Ryan Condal, who were co-showrunners at the time. Now, usually I interview guests on this podcast about a specific episode of a show, but since Kieran has worked on both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, I figured it would be more interesting to chat about his work in general on each shows and how the art that he has created for that world has evolved over the years. Kieran, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you've been a concept designer for quite some time. You have other credits in film and televisions that include King Arthur, Terminator, Dark Fate, Curse, Enola Holmes, Fantastic Beasts, and The Secrets of Dumbledore. But you've done a lot of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. So first of all, tell me, what does a concept artist do? Can you explain what role does your job play in the making of a show like House of the Dragon?
Yeah, basically, we work closely with the production designer to help them realize their vision of how the sets and the environments and everything will look in the show or in the film. That's our primary sort of role, basically, to sort of help bring that to life and show the producers, the directors, and everyone how everything will look on the day when they film it, essentially, or and how it could look in the final sort of look of the show.
Okay. How does someone become a concept artist?
For me, it was a very windy path to get where I am. I think a good way to go is to learn about production design, to learn about set building and things like that. That's the route that some people take. For me, it was a little different. I went through the route of visual effects. I used to be a digital matte painter. I worked at a few different companies, like the Moving Picture Company, and I learnt matte painting. And through that, I sort of discovered concept art, because they're sort of matte painting and concept art are sort of related. And I sort of realized that concept art was more what I wanted to do because it's a little bit more creative. It's at the beginning of the process when you're coming up with ideas of how things will look, and you don't have to be quite so precise and meticulous with the final image. You're just sort of more coming up with ideas and designs, which is kind of the exciting part of the process for me in many ways. So it took me many years making that move from visual effects to concept art, but that's how I did it. And I gradually found my way into pre-production and started working for designers. I think my first concept art job was on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which is the Guy Ritchie film. And as soon as I sort of went on that, I sort of thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I actually met someone on that who briefly worked on Game of Thrones, and that's how I sort of interestingly found my way into Game of Thrones. But yeah, there are many ways into concept art, but the main thing is just having an aptitude for wanting to create images, wanting to create, having an artistic inclination and a love of film and TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I think concept artists, to me, what comes to mind is Lord of the Rings and all of the concept art that we saw back when those films came out. And so to me, concept art is very much like pen and paper, pencil drawings and all that. And I'm guessing it's not necessarily just that, or is that it has evolved a lot with all the technology we have now. So like, what sort of skills are required?
That's a very good point. I mean, it definitely has evolved a lot. Like, I actually was fortunate to meet Alan Lee, who worked on the Lord of the Rings films a few years back, and he is very traditional. He's drawing with pencil. He does these beautiful watercolors, and yeah, and he still sort of works that way, I believe. And so I think there is still a place for that in the industry, and I think people have a lot of respect for that, and I think it's also important for any concept artist to be able to draw as well. Like I think if you're a concept artist and you can't draw, then maybe you should try and work on it, kind of thing, and that's actually one of the things over the years that I've worked on, because I'm decent at drawing, but when I started, I knew I wanted to be better, and through the job and through doing courses and stuff, I worked on my drawing ability. But yeah, so it's much more reliant on computers now. It's much more reliant on creating things digitally, just because in a 3D program, for example, I use this one called Blender. You can very quickly throw together a scene, quickly model it in a semi-primitive way. But the beauty of that is you have it in 3D. So when, like Jim Clay, the production designer on House of the Dragon, if he wants to see a few different views of the same environment, it's very easy to do that. Whereas, working with pencil and paper, you could still do that, but it would take longer, and it would be a more challenging process trying to do that with more traditional methods. And it's all about efficiency at the end of the day. And I think with concept artists as well, we've all evolved with the technology, and new programs are always popping up, and it's down to us as individuals to be like, yeah, I think that will help my process working on this job, so that I can do my job better. But the key thing is wanting to keep it fun as well. And there are times if you're too bogged down in the 3D, if you're too bogged down in this sort of the technical side of it, every now and then you sort of think, wait a second, this isn't why I got into it. I want to be doing more of the artistic side of things. Yeah, I think it's trying to keep a balance between keeping an element of that traditional side, but making full use of the latest technology, because it is useful.
So how did you get started in the world of Westeros? Do you remember what was your very first design for Game of Thrones?
Ooh, yeah. First thing, it was on season 5, Game of Thrones. I think the first thing I worked on was Maggie's hut, where you see a young Cersei and a friend sort of approaching Maggie's hut. I think that was one of the first things. That, and I did a ship hold where I think Jaime Lannister and Bronn were in this ship hold. But that was like one of the first things I did, and I remember being quite nervous at the time because it was so exciting to be, on Game of Thrones, and I wanted to impress the bosses. So you feel a lot of pressure to try and produce a good image, and it was quite exciting and quite a nerve-wracking time. Sort of like, okay,
yeah, I can't imagine, because you're coming on board and the show is quite established by now. Season 5 is halfway through. So how was it? Like you said, it was nerve-wracking, and it must have been pretty high pressure too, because like you said, like you're trying to impress. So how did you find your footing?
I find a lot of it with the job as a concept artist is getting to know the production designer and how they work. So you kind of find, a natural flow where you sort of think, okay, they responded well to that image, so I'll push it more in that direction with the next thing I do, or that maybe there's certain styles of architecture that they like. So like with Deborah Riley on Game of Thrones, she really likes brutalism and things like that. So when it got into things like, I don't know, Dragonstone and stuff, we kind of knew, like, yeah, this is the kind of architectural style she wants to go for. So you kind of get into a flow with the designers you're working with. And yeah, so it was very much like that at the beginning on Game of Thrones. It was just sort of like getting into a flow of it, really, and sort of getting into the zone, finding your footing. And the season 5 I did from home, but then I must have done a good job because they invited me to Belfast for season 6, and then it just went on from there.
So what
But
difference does
yeah.
it make for you between working from home and being on location in Belfast? Does it make it easier because you're there with the team and then you can exchange and talk ideas more easily? Or does it even help because you may be able to catch a glimpse of what they're building and see what it actually can look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I do prefer it being on site with the designer. You can have these face-to-face conversations and really understand the brief and what it is that they want. But also, yeah, like you say, you have the sets right there. Often with the things you're doing, you might be doing like a little side room to the Scepter Baelor or something like that. So the set is right there, so you can just walk across the road, take some reference pictures to get the right kind of textures, the marble and all that sort of thing, and then you can just go back to your desk and, like, and work away. Whereas, yeah, when you're working from home, maybe you could ask someone to do it, but you're a bit more limited in some ways working from home. I mean, there's some pluses to working from home, but overall, especially on something like Game of Thrones, it was pretty awesome being in Belfast and getting to work with the team and as it was happening, and to get in and to be able to pop in and see a bit of filming and stuff like that.
So I know that for Game of Thrones, you designed the melted Iron Throne that we see at the end of the
Mm.
show. Can you explain to me, using that example, like, can you explain to me what the process of concepting that is?
I think I do. Yeah, I do remember having conversations with Deborah Riley about it, and I think I did. Yeah, I did a few sort of phases of the stages of the melting, essentially. And I think it took a few attempts to come up with a sort of a look that we liked. And I remember I think we showed like a final version to David and Dan, and they sort of gave it the thumbs up. It was a relatively smooth process doing that. I just came up with a few different versions of how a semi-melted throne will look. But yeah, I think I did some tests in 3D with like this sort of particle program where you could sort of do kind of liquid kind of simulations. I sort of combined that with elements of swords because I was imagining something a bit like sort of the liquid metal in Terminator 2. And I was imagining something like that, and I think they responded quite well.
So doing that design, you also did the ruined throne room, which, from what I understood, from what I read on your website, was quite surrounded with a lot of secrecy, and it wasn't something that everybody knew was going on. So you had to like navigate the fact that only few people knew, and so getting a good brief, for something when you have like only bits and pieces of what's actually happening. Does that make your work a lot more difficult?
Yeah, it's a funny one. Yeah, yeah, it was very secretive at the time. That's true. And it was kind of the whole, ruined throne room was I remember there was a phase of the project where it was kind of in a slight state of flux in terms of like how it was going to look. And I remember one of the early concepts I did was this idea of how they wanted the council, the last council meeting where Bran is announced as the king. Originally, they were thinking of doing that in the ruined throne room, and we kind of used that as an opportunity to have a first look at how the ruined throne room would look. I guess within the art department, it wasn't too secretive. Like we all kind of knew about it, so it wasn't too bad. But I think it was more when they were building it and filming it, it became a very secretive thing, and they were quite careful about who could go in, especially when they were filming. I think I was quite lucky to pop in. I think it was the weekend before they filmed the scenes with Jon and Daenerys, and so it was they'd already laid down like the main layer of snow and everything. So I saw it all ready to be filmed, and they were doing some tests. The cinematographer, I think it was Jonathan Freeman. He was in there doing some tests with a stand-in for Daenerys, and getting to see that was like, it was pretty cool and pretty special to sort of see all this, just the whole ruined throne room, the throne there with snow on it. It was just quite a special thing to see.
So you get to imagine what the melted Iron Throne would look like, and then fast forward a few years later, and you get to imagine the new Iron Throne, the one for House of the Dragon. Can you tell me a little bit about concepting that?
It was funny. I didn't see that one coming, but I ended up on House of the Dragon, and I think one of the first tasks I was given when pre-production properly started on that was the Iron Throne. That was the first thing Deb gave me, but then she unfortunately left the project, and Jim Clay came on board as the new designer. I remember, sort of a fairly stressful first couple of weeks because it's quite a difficult thing to do because there's so many swords. And initially I was literally using like hundreds and thousands of swords in 3D, and it was really slowing down my computer, and I was like, yeah, maybe this isn't the way to do it. So I gradually evolved it into a process where I don't know if you've heard of a program called ZBrush. It's like a digital sculpting program. So essentially I felt, a better way of approaching it was to essentially sculpt the swords into more of a overall kind of silhouette or shape, and that was a more realistic way of sort of doing it in 3D. And then basically I think I was on it for like a week or a couple of weeks right at the beginning, and then we kind of put it to the side a bit, and then Jim Clay came on board, and I think it was like a couple of months later they put me back on it, and that's when I sort of worked on these sort of final. I did like 3 versions that Jim wanted to try. One with the swords standing up, which is what we see in the show. Mm-hmm. One where the swords were more kind of wilted, almost like blades of grass or something. And then one design that I kind of liked, which I sort of came up with, which is kind of like they were kind of crisscrossing the swords, so kind of stood up, but more in a crisscrossing sort of design. But yeah, the one they wanted to go for was the standing up swords, and that was a really cool one to get to do. I mean, it was really, obviously, when you're doing it that it's quite an important, iconic thing that you're working on. So you want to, again, you sort of feel that pressure of like, this is something people are going to be judging when they see it. So you want to do it right. But I think we pulled it off. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it ended up, and getting to see it when it was made, when they constructed it in the throne room set and stuff. Again, that was quite a nice and special thing to get to see.
Do you remember what the brief was? Was it just make a new Iron Throne, or was there like from the get-go conversation about we want a ton of swords, or was it more we want it to be reminiscent of the one in Game of Thrones, but not exactly the same? Like, what were the conversations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The early conversations, I was given a drawing. I can't remember the name of the artist, but a drawing that was a bit more close to what George R. R. Martin was sort of envisioning, and that was kind of like a starting point. The key thing is that they wanted more swords for sure, and they wanted a bit of height to it. But then it became, I did some early versions based on that sort of brief. But then Miguel saw that, and he basically said you have to think about how it's going to work on camera, and you can't have it too high. So we had to it was finding a balance basically between what we knew in the Game of Thrones TV show and then trying to make it a little closer to the George R. R. Martin sort of vision. Mm-hmm. And making sure it works on camera, making sure it works in a sort of cinematic sort of way. It was a bit of a process of finding that middle ground, basically. But early on, it was, looking at literal sort of illustrations and drawings that were closer to what the original vision was.
Errors were made in the hours following King Viserys' death.
The war be fought. Many will die. And the victor will eventually ascend the throne. There is no war so hateful to the gods. There's a war between kin. And no war so bloody as a war between dragons.
So you've been working on both seasons of House of the Dragon so far, and you've designed a lot of things for that show. On top of the Iron Throne, you've worked on spaces ranging from the Red Keep to Dragonstone and Rook's Rest, even the Godswoods of Harrenhal. What gives you inspiration? How do you get started on a design, especially on a show like that has sort of two reference materials, one being what we've seen on Game of Thrones, what we know of these places from Game of Thrones, and then George R. R. Martin's work?
I work very closely with Jim Clay, the designer, and he's great because he does his own. He's a little bit like Alan Lee in a way. He does his own drawings and watercolors. So it's wonderful working with a designer who's a great artist themselves, and he'll produce these little sketches and watercolors, and that is a wonderful starting place with a lot of the stuff we do. He'll often sort of hand us a sketch and be like, this is what I'm thinking. This is where his head is at in terms of like what he's envisioning for this particular scene, whether it's a castle or, sort of a certain look, and maybe some, reference images. He often likes sort of Byzantine sort of stuff. That's a lot of the influence with the stuff we're doing in the show, to try and give it a slightly different look, because you don't get so much of that in Game of Thrones. So it's trying to inject a slightly different style that he really likes into House of the Dragon. So it's kind of taking what he gives us and then trying to bring it to life basically, and sort of like, okay, this is what he's thinking, this is what his sketch is, whatever. Now I've got to sort of like try and construct something that sort of matches what he's looking and feels right for this world, feels right for House of the Dragon, but also feels like we're still in that Game of Thrones world. We're still in that world that people will recognize. So it's sort of finding a sort of balance, because often it is quite rooted in realism with the whole Game of Thrones look. So it's always trying to find that balance. You don't want to veer too far into fantasy, but sometimes it's nice to sort of head that way a little bit, and things like the Dragon Mont in season 2 was quite a fun bit to work on, because it felt a little bit more grand and epic, and that was a nice space to work on for sort of pushing things a bit in that direction. And so it's an organic process. It's an ongoing process working with the designer basically.
Yeah, there are certain spaces in season 2 of House of the Dragon that we got to really see a bit better this time around, especially Dragonstone. We spent a lot of time there in season 2, and I know that you've done some work on the interiors and exteriors of it. Can you tell me a little bit about designing a space where we spent quite a few scenes, which is Rhaenyra's scroll library?
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun one. Yes, it's interesting because we knew, I guess partially because of the way George wrote it in Fire and Blood, and just so they had to sort of be faithful to that in the script. So we knew going into season 2 that Rhaenyra is going to be at Dragonstone for a long time. So we need to give her lots of playroom, lots of space to play with, spaces in Dragonstone we haven't seen before. So with Jim, we sort of came up with these ideas of these different areas of Dragonstone we haven't seen before, like the library, the scroll library, and we wanted to do something a little different that we haven't sort of seen before in the show or in any kind of film or TV show actually, with the look and design of it, and it needs to be faithful to the sort of the Dragonstone look. So it was kind of making a big composite set, a little bit like the Red Keep set, something with big areas. So you have the painted table room, that's a big area. And then that links to other areas where there are bedrooms and other chambers and walkways, so there's 2 levels to it. So, you've got steps going up to other bits, and, and then the library and everything as well. And an area that leads to where the Dragon Mont is as well. So it was an ongoing process to sort of figure that out, basically. Figure it all out in 3D, see what works, trying out different camera angles, sort of like seeing what looks good.
What was the part of Dragonstone that you had the most fun designing?
Does Dragonmont count as? I think it does count as part of Dragonstone, doesn't it? Because it's in the bowels of sort of the island. Yeah, I really enjoyed that because Jim gave me a fairly open brief with that. He just gave me a couple of references of just big caves, and an artist called Piranesi who did these beautiful etchings, and it was something that was kind of quite blocky and pyramidy. So I kind of just came up with some really big epic fancy designs in this huge space, and that was probably one of the best weeks I had in season 2, where I was just like bashing out these ideas, and just sort of like showing them to Jim, and he loved everything he saw basically, and that was just it was a really fun creative bit to work on basically, and I really that bit was cool. And you have some really cool scenes that happen in there with all the stuff with the dragons and everything. And
Yes, I think one of the coolest episodes of season 2 is the red sewing, that episode with in the Dragon Mount, and seeing that it was just much more than just that stone platform, like all that we'd seen of Dragon Mount before was just people walking on the platform, getting on a dragon, leaving. We didn't get a sense of how big it was, and that there was a bottom that you could actually go down some steps and face the dragon. So yeah, that was a really cool one.
no, absolutely, yeah, it was yeah, that was a fun one to get to help design and to be a part of that. Yeah, is always cool.
What about the Red Keep? Because we also spent a lot of time in Dragonstone, but we also spent quite a lot of time in King's Landing, and especially in the Red Keep. And it changes, the power dynamic affects who's where. And again, it is a set that people know very well from Game of Thrones. When you work on the interiors of the Red Keep, like how does the work done on the first show influence the concepts for the spin-off?
Yeah, it influences it quite a bit in the end. Yeah, I mean, basically a little bit like with Dragonstone, we knew we wanted it to be a big set. It was something Ryan and Miguel wanted to do, and Jim was very excited to do as well. So very early on season 1, sort of Jim came up with like a very sort of simple sort of layout of like, okay, this is where the entrance hallway could be, and we have a grand staircase, and then we could have the small council chamber here, and so we kind of figured out a sort of a basic layout quite early on. And I quickly realized just how massive this thing was going to be. We were basically building a whole castle. And the thing is, I quite intimately knew the Red Keep we have in Game of Thrones, and it's kind of funny because at the time in Belfast, it was like when you first go in there, it's like, oh wow, this is amazing. But after a while, you get to know it and you sort of realize, yeah, but maybe we could do it grander. We could make it higher and bigger, and so in a way, going into House of the Dragon, it was an opportunity to sort of redo the Red Keep in the grander way that we always wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what, for me, I loved it really, because it was an opportunity to do that. And working with Jim, we just sort of, he was pushing for the Byzantine look of things like the windows and the various architecture. And it was quite exciting to sort of get to do this big grand staircase where a lot of action was going to happen. It was a bit of an ongoing process. And like you say, we kind of pushed things quite far. And I remember I did an early version of Rhaenyra's Chamber. I haven't actually posted any of these images online. I did an early version of Rhaenyra's Chamber that was very different, a very different kind of style and shape. And it was quite cool. And it's a shame we didn't get to do it in the end in some ways. But it was something Jim wanted to do, but I think Miguel and Ryan sort of looked at it and sort of thought that they need. I think they sort of decided that we need more things in there that were recognizable from Game of Thrones. So we kind of reined it in a bit and sort of made it look a bit more like sort of Cersei's chamber and various chambers that we see in Game of Thrones with the style of sort of arches and windows going out onto a balcony and everything. And so we ended up changing Rhaenyra's chamber quite a lot. And now I think it's Alicent's chamber, because that's what it was in season 2, I think, wasn't it? So that is sort of recognizable from Game of Thrones, like, so people will be able to sort of hopefully see that link in the style.
And of course, for all the designs that we're discussing right now, I will put links in the episode notes for the listeners so that they can see your work that you've posted on social media and on your website. I kind of feel like concept design involves a lot of architecture.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's the nature of production design, a lot of it, and especially with someone like Jim Clay, because he is an architect. He's trained up. So
but for you, do you feel like it's like, oh, it's a knowledge I need to acquire?
I think, yeah, it's an interesting one, because I guess initially when I got into concept art, I didn't realize it was going to involve such a high level of architecture that it does. But I sort of realized over time that it was a useful thing to be learning. And interestingly, especially with Jim, I feel like I've learned a lot from him over the last few years, in terms of how I view production design in film and TV. I feel like he's opened my mind a bit in terms of like what you can do with architecture and what sort of works visually, which is a very useful skill to learn. And I'm trying to implement it in my own sort of projects, and I'm trying to make a short film and things like that. And So I'm trying to use skills that I've learned thanks to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon sort of for my own thing. So yeah.
Do you get to play with other things every once in a while? Do you get to do character design, creature design?
Yeah, I mean it depends on the job, but like early on House of the Dragon, and this was like April 2020, like just when the pandemic was sort of starting over here. So it was a bit of a weird time, obviously.
Mhm.
But I remember I just moved to this place where I am now in St. Albans, and me and the other guys, we were doing loads of concepts, and then we were like given a week to work directly with Miguel, coming up with ideas for how the dragons could look.
Mm.
And 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 I remember Deb, who's working on it with us at the time, sort of mentioned that he likes things that are more hand drawn, and
Yeah.
so I took note of that, and I just the first couple of days I didn't really touch the computer so much. I was just drawing. I like using chalk and charcoal on sort of grey toned sort of paper. So I was just by hand doing lots of sketches of different kind of dragon sort of looks, different head designs, and
Mhm.
different shapes and styles, and it was just sort of bashing out ideas. And then and again it was sort of you feel a lot of pressure because it's because of what it is, the
Yeah.
nature of what it is, and it's Miguel, so he's sort of he's pretty big, and in the as a director and within the Game of Thrones universe, so you want to impress him. And but yeah, it was one of the best. It's one of the best weeks I've had as a concept artist, actually. Just coming up with ideas for how dragons could look, and there were a couple he really liked, and one of them essentially ended up being Cyrax, and then one or two of my other sketches I think sort of influenced the look of Vagar and things like that in the end.
Okay.
So it was funny because I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more on the dragons, and I asked Deb sort of just before we got going properly in pre-production of season one. Oh, I'd love to do more dragons if I can. But then she like got me to do the throne and things like that, and then it just kind of and then it naturally evolves into just doing. You got all these sets that need
Yeah.
doing, and essentially we are an art department for production design, so those are the things that are the priority.
Yeah.
And they had these two guys, Kirill and Constantine, who I've been working with, but they were kind of like the dragon guys, and they kind of were doing all that. Yeah,
You had to
it's
you
just the
had
way
to
it worked
share. You
out.
couldn't do the throne and the dragons. You can't
Yeah,
have all the cool stuff.
exactly. You can't do it all at the same time, so it's one or the other. So yeah.
It's pretty neat. Vagar, I think, is one of the most interesting looking dragons I've ever seen on TV. He gives me lizard vibes more than other dragons because of the whole like neck thing.
Mm.
He reminds me of a Komodo dragon a lot.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
find him terrifying. He's the most terrifying dragon I've ever seen.
No, absolutely, and that's something Miguel really pushed for. I think he liked that sort of really sort of old, prehistoric kind of looking kind of thing, and yeah, they really pushed that with the Komodo dragon sort of look. So yeah, it was an interesting process to get to sort of be a little part of, and then to get to witness as they came out with more designs. And I think they did a great job with all the dragon designing. It was really, it's ended up really good. So yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite location that you've worked on for House of the Dragon?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I'd probably say overall, probably Dragonstone, just because I mean I've always been quite pro Targaryen, I think, and
I was
and
gonna say
it's
you're
one of
Team Black then.
I think yeah, I'm Team Black at the end of the day, and it's just something about the location that's really cool, and the style of the castle, the whole look of the castle, and I was quite so when I was given the interiors and the exteriors to do on that was I was quite happy about that. I guess there are certain things you just enjoy working on more than others, just because they have a certain look that's really cool, and you really click with, like, you just sort of psychologically, you just like, yeah, this place looks cool, so you enjoy working on it. And Dragonstone, I've always loved.
I get it. It's a good one. I particularly like, I don't know if it's the throne room or if it's the council or if it's a multi-purpose room, but the room that has the table is my favorite.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is the painted table room basically. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I think they just wanted a bigger space compared to what we had in Game of Thrones. They wanted something grander and more epic, and they really went for it.
There's definitely a difference between, I mean, it's been a while since I've rewatched the parts of Game of Thrones that featured Dragonstone, but I remember that room with the dragon on the wall and the table next to it. And that's pretty much it. Like, other than that, I don't remember a lot of the grandeur that we see in House of the Dragon.
Yeah. It's like another small council chamber with what they had in Game of Thrones. But they did have the audience chamber with the stone throne that Daenerys sits on. That was kind of the big one we did in Game of Thrones. I don't know why exactly we haven't, why they've chosen not to do that. It might be budget reasons why we haven't sort of, because I think it was mentioned at one point that they were gonna have some of it or something, have the throne at the very least or something. But for whatever reason, they've decided to leave it.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that stone throne. Well, maybe it was built later.
Maybe it was like a little addition added on later. So yeah,
it'll be like one of Rhaenyra's descendant will make that.
Yeah, maybe they added it later. Yeah.
Moving forward, if you get to keep going working on the show, what are you looking forward to potentially do? And of course, we can't talk specifics, but like if there's like a specific set that you're excited to revisit, or something that we can address things that are general knowledge from the book.
Yeah. There's more battles coming up, aren't there? There's more.
Yeah.
I think, and the way season 2 ended, it's kind of leaves it very kind of like, okay, we're properly going into war now. So So I hope I get to do more concepts that involve wars and battles. Hopefully, I mean that'd be a nice thing to do. I mean I've done a bit of that in the past, things like Battle of the Bastards and some bits in the final season where it's all kind of destroyed King's Landing, destroyed Red Keep. So I guess actually, as a concept artist, it's quite fun to do stuff that's destroyed.
I was going to say, are you looking forward? Are you looking forward to destruction, basically?
Yeah, and I think there will be some destructions coming up. So, I quite enjoy doing that, because on the final season of Game of Thrones, I really enjoyed doing all the ruined Red Keep and ruined King's Landing shots, and that was actually in terms of the final season of Game of Thrones, that's probably some of my best stuff, some of the stuff that I enjoyed the most. Daenerys standing at the top of the steps, giving her sort of victory speech and stuff like that. And that was really important to David and Dan. That went on for a long time, sort of getting that one to evoke the right look that they wanted. There's a long dialogue with them about that. So I guess more of that sort of thing in House of the Dragon would be nice. But I don't know exactly what's. I have an idea of what's going to happen, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think it's fair that we all have a general idea of shit's about to go down.
Yeah.
And there's probably going to be a lot of burning buildings and burning ships.
Burning things happening with dragons, probably people getting killed. I don't know. There's going to be a lot of destruction and a lot of action, and there's going to be a lot happening.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll definitely be continuing on it for a bit. Yeah.
It's the end of this episode of Once Upon a TV Time. Thank you so much for listening. Kieran Belshaw, thank you for agreeing to chat with me about all things Westeros and House of the Dragon. You can check out the show notes, dear listener, to find out more information about Kieran and to see examples of the concepts he did for the show. Folks, I will be back soon with a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time and a new guest. Stay tuned, follow this podcast on social media for all the details, leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast, and until then, go watch some television.